Well, thank you again. So I will present you today concerning my PhD student, Maxime Wetta. I will thank you. At this time, he's finishing his manuscript, so I will present you today his work. This work concerns an industrial application, and the material in the study is a cellular material, polymer foam. So it's quite complex, and this material, which is observed just here, is used to fill structures, most of the time metallical structure in industrial application, and it is used to limit the weight. And of course, as it is used for industrial application, this material needs to transfer mechanical load and is subjected to mechanical load from quasi-static to dynamic loading. And that is why, to help design, it's necessary to try to estimate the fracture properties, especially in tension. So how we can do that? In the literature, we have some purpose for that. Of course, for cellular materials, you can follow the Gibson and HB concept and models. We have a strong link between the fracture toughness and the relative density, and of course, the cell walls properties and geometries. So that's an option. Which work very well. Another option is to use the classical linear elastic fracture mechanics approach and formalism as for homogeneous materials. And as Marzavina and Lionel made, it works too very well, even if you have a complex microstructure and heterogeneities. So our work here is to propose an alternative. We will use a quasi-brittle approach, quasi-brittle theory, to study the fracture behavior of this complex microstructure polymer material and to estimate the crack growth resistance. In this work, in this presentation, I only will be focused on the quasi-static regime to study the crack growth resistance. So the material in the study, industrial application is quite complex to have. So we have to manufacture laboratory materials. And for that, we are using a polymer sheet, which is expanded between two metallic plates. And by doing that, it is possible to have different densities with different boundary conditions. And finally, we have an expanded sheet of polymer, and it will be machined to have different specimen geometry. So the microstructure has been, of course, characterized because it's quite complex. The microstructure is finally a little bit large because we have cells of about few hundred microns. So it is possible to use laboratory X-ray tomography, and we can have a good information about the microstructure and the cell size and orientation. In our case, we have a gradient of the microstructure in the thickness, and we have observed that cells were shown to be more spherical in the core of the structure. So we have some skin score effect. But if you want to have more information about that, we still have a paper published on the link between the microstructure and the microscopic mechanical behavior. So in this study, we have used a classical compact tension specimen, which is about 40 millimeter length at room temperature using a classical tensile testing machine in quasi-static regime. So it's very, very classical for this kind of study. The specific loading we compare a classical monotheus loading with cyclic testing because we made a previous work on other materials, and we have observed that the cycling helps to stabilize the crack propagation, of course, but the second reason is that the cycling helps to dissociate the energetic contribution from elastic contribution to inelastic contribution. So you have a more rigorous analysis of the energetic contribution. So to do that, we dissociate the blue and the red area. The blue is considered to the elastic energy, which is estimated between two different stiffness, because when you reload the crack, you have a good estimate of the elastic stiffness. So between these two different stiffness at each step, it is possible to have a good estimate of the elastic energy consumed by the crack during its propagation. And the other contribution, which is the inelastic contribution, is obtained with the maximum displacement. And it is the red area just presented here. So by doing that, by cycling, you have a good estimate of the consumed energy. And the last thing we need to construct the resistance curve is the crack length calculation. For that, we have two options. First one is the experimental possibility. For that, we made some optical measurements on each side of the specimen. And the other possibility is to apply the equivalent LEFM theory to estimate the linearistic equivalent crack length by numerical simulation. And finally, if you have these both parameters, you can construct the resistance curve. So some results just presented here. The first one concerns the crack length and the stiffness as a function of the crack length. We have compared the two different options, the two different calculations. So we have observed that each measurements are fitting very well. So that means that the numerical estimate is good. So we can find the equivalent crack length with the numerical simulation. So that's easier to do that. So it's good to have this kind of results. The first other result concerned the monotonous loading. So we have compared classical several methods, the standards with the maximum load, the area, with the global area under the monotonous loading, so the force displacement curve, and the compliance. We have observed that whatever the density, we have a comparable value of the fracture energy, GF. And when we compare with the cyclic loading, so we construct the resistance curve with the elastic part of the energy, and we can observe that we can reach a plateau value, which is quite different from the fracture energy measured before with the monotonous one. So we can observe that we have a difference of approximately 30%. And this difference is directly explained by the inelastic part of the energy. So that's interesting because the inelastic contribution corresponds directly to the difference between the fracture energy and the others estimate with the elastic part. So that means that this contribution is characteristic to a specific mechanism, which is not directly correlated to the crack propagation, which is probably small-scale plasticity or friction between the crack surface. So another information about that, which is probably linked, is about the fractographic analysis. So when we observe the fracture surface, we have an example here with a density just presented there. So we can, first observation is that the crack front seems to be relatively straight through the thickness. So it's a good observation, even if the cell geometry are not quite homogeneous. Another observation concerns the topology of the fracture surface, which is quite complex. Probably this complex topology for cellular materials, which highlights some roughness, even if it's cellular materials. We can postulate that this complex topology is probably linked to the inelastic mechanisms like small-scale plasticity or friction, even if the role of heterogeneities could explain bifurcation of the main front crack. So the last result concerned the diagram and the evolution of the fracture energy as a function of the relative density. As it was expected, we have a good link between the fracture toughness and the relative density. So the relative density explains very well the increase of the fracture energy, as Ashby and Gibson highlights before. And probably the difference comparatively to the literature data is probably explained by the inelastic part, which is most of the time not taken into account. So to conclude this presentation, we can say that for this complex material, even if we have a complex microstructure or polymeric nature and a nonlinear phenomenon, the quasi-brittle approach seems to be relevant for describing the fracture behavior and the crack growth resistance. Another conclusion concerns the cyclic loading, which seems to be interesting to dissociate inelastic and elastic contributions, which highlight and helps to describe more rigorously the physical mechanism involved in the cracking process. A next work, which is in fact still in progress, is to try to understand the role of the cells in the cracking process. And for that, we have made some in situ X-ray tomography fracture tests. Thanks a lot for listening.